Hey guys, welcome to my new tutorial, Concept Art Time versus Quality. And in this tutorial, I want to explain to you a little bit of the trial and error kind of stuff I found out throughout my career so far. And in doing so, I'm going to lay out my process and show it to you from a theoretical point of view. There won't be much visuals in this video, so if you're into theory or that's something that you find interesting or useful to your own process, hopefully you can learn something here. When I was up and coming, I really didn't have too much access to this kind of thing, and the information I did find was a little limited and some of it also came from experience, so that's really a bonus that I have to share with you. So when we first get a brief, it's the first thing that happens usually. And so I'm just going to write here, brief, and that's the first thing. So this is what a client will give you. It'll be the job spec, and it'll be a character, vehicle, and environment, maybe a keyframe, who knows? And they need you to solve a problem, right? So that's our job as concept artists, to solve problems. So once we have the brief, there's not much we can really change there. We might be able to argue some better points. We might be able to do a little bit of back and forth and really ask them the important questions, right? Which is where, how, why, um, when. Uh, what else have we got here? Just having a look at my notes. What? Of course. And sometimes who, right? So when we get a brief, it's good to kind of run through these and kind of figure out what exactly is this brief made out of and help define it for ourselves more than the client really. But it also prevents having to solve more problems. It actually defines the brief more so that there are less problems to solve. And a big reason you want to kind of a little bit bother your clients at first, if you really have that kind of relationship, is to save yourself some headache later down the road in case they want you to rework something or in case what you perceived the brief to be wasn't what they perceived it to be. And so this is a really important stage to just kind of dig in and sit down with the client, either through Skype or through a physical meeting, and say like, okay, let's talk about this. Tell me your vision. Tell me everything you'd like to see. And that's what we're there for, is to kind of take the director's or the art director's vision and make it real. Pardon me. So the second step, sorry, so unprofessional, is research. And I'm also going to include here just a little plus sign, play. So this phase is really, really important to delivering a quality product. And this point, along with the third point, which I'm going to write here, which is the story idea, all caps, idea, and image purpose, right? Sort of the same thing. And I'm going to put in brackets, define. So these these two pieces of information here are what I like to call dollar money, because the more time, can't write today, that you spend here on the clock is going to do two things. It's going to upset people who are paying the cash money, right? Your executives and budget guys. And it's also going to it's going to cost a lot of money. And these two are kind of related. And the results, though, right, are worth it. Because what you get is you're taking this big question up here and you're defining it in great detail, right? And as a designer, we want to eliminate as many questions as early on as possible from our design. And if we can say, okay, this vehicle is going to be a box shape, right? Then our research will tell us, okay, box-shaped vehicles are generally military, right? Or maybe it's old, right? Old cars are sort of square. But if our research indicates that we're making a futuristic vehicle, and we know that futuristic vehicles are all sleek and long and beautiful and have a certain shape appeal, then suddenly we know that we don't have to do this kind of thing, right? We take this out of the design equation. We don't do thumbnails of square objects, right? And this is really, really useful because we save a lot of time actually in the production by doing this. And more than that, we deliver more accurate results that probably excite the client and make them see the final product as closer to their vision. And yeah, it's sort of like this weird catch-22 that clients have to realize is that the more time that they pay for in terms of research and narrative, the stronger the product will be. And I'm going to just come in here and say that most people, unless you're working with really high-end people, will realize that this is not a thing. They don't know about this, and they kind of ignore it. And they say like, well, we're paying you for 3 days work, and we want you to produce 30 designs or something, right? And what they're going to get is 30 designs that are sort of okay, right? But if they say, we're going to give you 3 days to work and you can spend 2 of those on research, or they say, you know, spend that amount of time on 10 designs, and you can spend 2 days on research, and what you're going to get is like 10 quality designs, right? And the difference will be pretty huge. And this is just my own experience. This is just something I've discovered, that clients who do give you this amount of time, they're rewarded by it. And I try to do some research on every project. Not every project has time for research. I did a recent freelance gig and the guy was just like, I need a character, I need it in this style, and it needs to be of this certain class and this stereotype. And I was given a day and I was like, okay, well, that destroys my research time. So what he's going to get is exactly what he asked for, as close to the brief as I can read it. And it might not be 100% accurate. And when he gets it, he might feel, oh man, I would change this, I would change that, I would change that. But then he's going to have to pay for that, right? Because that's time. So let's move on to the fourth point. And it's just right here. Okay, so the next part is shapes. And I'm going to put in here psychology. And I'm going to put in here composition. And I'm going to put in here color. And I'm going to put in brackets loose. Right? Now, this stage here is also really important, but you can skip 2 and 3 to get to it. Now, shapes is sort of the same thing as I was talking about before. Are we dealing with shape language that's triangle? Are we dealing with shape language that's square? Are we dealing with shape language that's round? Each of these will give us a psychological element to our image and how the audience perceives it. And this can be in composition as well. So if I create an image on a frame like landscape, and I make it like this, and I put a little mountain here and a little guy over here and something in the foreground and another little element here, then what we have is shape language reading as pleasant because it's round and linear because it's flat. And this gives us a sense of everything is fine, everything is peaceful. But if, on the other hand, I want to create a dramatic or emotional piece, I can maybe slant that horizon, right, and create like a little object here and maybe a character fighting another guy here or something dramatic, maybe a dragon coming out of the back of this hill here with a claw on top or something. We suddenly have a very different image and it feels different. So this is what I mean by composition play, right? And this is the importance of creating many thumbnails, right? To define what your image might look like. And the great part about stage 4 in creating time versus quality concept art is that it actually doesn't take that much time to produce these. You could probably bang out a whole bunch of thumbnails in one day and pick the best one. And this stage I would recommend for most things. I mean, character design, I always start with a silhouette and I work out like how is the character going to look when he's standing here with his gun or baton, or maybe he's got long arms like this, maybe he's got 4 legs. Like this early kind of development is the first read that you'll have on screen if it's a movie, an animation, or a video game. And it's super useful to define stage 4 before you move on. Color is important for creating emotion as well. Obviously, a red painting will have a completely different effect to a green painting. And there are stereotypes with color that you can play into. And of course, learning about color is incredibly important for delivering a very quality piece. And it doesn't take that long to explore color. I mean, just throwing paint on the canvas can often give you results that you are starting to get excited about. And it's also the main reason why I say main characters are red and certain things like that. So at this stage of creating your thumbnails, maybe you want to do like little color explorations and just drop a whole bunch of red here and maybe some blue over here and maybe some like purple here and see what those 3 relationships are doing for your image. And this is still very much important to the research phase of your brief. But number 4, I would consider a place you have to explore. I don't think you can really skip stage 4 like you can skip stage 2 and 3 in your process. All right, so let's move on to defining the image after stage 4. After stage 4 is what I like to call the large primary shapes or shape read. And in brackets here, I'm going to put an important word, structure. So this is the structure of your image. When you're creating a character, how big you make their chest versus their legs, right? That's going to give you a certain indication that this is a strong character or a masculine character. And so when you start playing with this shape read initially, it's going back here and it's defining what we came up with in stage 4. And we're sort of now defining the still somewhat loose final result. And in terms of landscape painting, this will be defining things like there's a mountain over here, there's a platform here, and maybe there's an enormous pipe over here, right? And it's a really big structure, or maybe it's like a building or something massive, right? So these are the big shapes we lay down first in our image, and we get those to read in a pleasing way. And it's a very important stage, and the cool part about this stage and the stages that follow it is there's a logic to it. At stage 5, things are still sort of loose, but they're being defined. But the good news is they take less time to define, right? So these are the big shapes that if you're in a very fast-paced production, you can maybe do a really strong, fast character silhouette. And by the time you reach stage 6, after stage 6, you might be able to hand off that design to someone who can work from it, who's a skilled worker, right? So here we go. Next stage, as you may have guessed, is medium primary shape read. And I'm going to put here definition, right? definition, and forms, because that's what this is all about. So we know that our basic building block for a house in our image totally looks like this, right? Exactly like this. And but what we don't know is just what is that silhouette defined as. Okay, now we're gonna do secondary details. There's a window over here, there's a door over here, there's a window over here. This roof needs to have tiles. So this is our sort of secondary detail pass. We might even add secondary shapes as part of this pass. So let's put like maybe a shed or an outhouse or something. And this will define the secondary shapes, which are obviously smaller than the big shape that we had before. And this gives our painting some immediate realism, and it kind of gives it some believability. And you may have guessed this next part as well, which is more time is spent here, right? But it's not a lot, so it's still less time than the next phase, which is, as you may have guessed it, small primary shape read. And I'm going to put here the details. This is something I'm sure most of you know. Um, there is a really great artist called Gilmanov, and if you haven't heard of him, I recommend you check out his work if you haven't already. He did a series of 2D tutorials where he laid out this idea of building a big shape and defining it with some medium shapes and then putting in the details. And over here I'm going to say scale and realism, right? This is my own personal belief that the more you define something, the more realistic it tends to be. So the more nuts and bolts you put on, say, a metal sheet, then it'll start to be more believable that it's a real thing, right? And when I say scale, this means something like, oh, I've got a city, and there's some buildings going into the background here, maybe, and what happens is if I put a tiny little light in the background, right, or a tiny little detail, that gives a sense of scale because things in the background are smaller than things in the foreground, right? Lights in the foreground, for instance. And I recommend you checking out James Pake's tutorials. He talks a lot about that, and very useful information in defining a process. And of course, this applies to characters as well. You can have a character whose head design, with his neck coming out here, real good drawing here. And this will be the overall structure, so we'll call that number 5, and then maybe the ear and the hair will be number 6, and then the eyes, nose, mouth will be number 7, right? And of course, if you're doing like a low poly game, you don't need those details, right? Or if you're doing a top down, you don't need those details because they won't be seen. And this is where, of course, the most time is spent. And the more time you spend on number 7, which is the small details, the longer your piece will take to your concept will take to finish. And if you want to deliver quickly, you can minimize on the small details and maximize on the medium details. But it's always good to have some small details in your painting or character concept to deliver to the client. But if you're on tight deadline, man, it's actually better. You don't necessarily need too much of this. And you can always spend time on this afterwards. And often with marketing art, that's exactly what happens, right? Is people spend a lot of time in this stage to bring it up for publishing. And yeah. So after these 3 stages, I like to include an 8th stage, which is some people might consider as part of number 7, but I like to separate it, especially digitally, onto different layers. And this is the atmospheric. Atmos. Oh, can't spell today. Stage, right? And I'm gonna put here or plus effects. So maybe we have a character and he's got his sword. Yeah, this is exactly how I concept. And he's got a fire on his sword, and I'll put that on a layer, and maybe the glow on a layer as well, just in case. You can even animate that as a GIF and send it to your client. or maybe there's a gust of wind coming past, and you want to layer that over your character for effect. I would put that on a separate layer because you can control it and you can remove it at any time if you need the reference of the main character. And it doesn't take too long. That's the good news, to put these things in your painting. But it definitely, for me at least, brings my paintings to life and makes people really appreciate the sort of real magic that you're putting into the image. And it can be subtle as well. It might be, just a little bit of a glow or something on the edge of something, and that already brings it to life. So really, how much time you spend here is up to you, and of course, the needs of your image. And the ninth and final stage of time versus quality is post-production, right? So I'm just going to write post-production. And I'm going to put a little thing here that says polish. Or Polish, haha. Polish post-production, it's what you do to your image at the end to make it sing. It might be a sharpen pass. It might be a color pass to correct the colors. It might be the levels pass to correct the values of your painting into one direction or another. It might be a blur pass to separate foreground, background, movement. It might be something like, what else do I tend to use? Maybe it's like details that you forgot to put in early on. Maybe it's an addition to your painting. Maybe it's a change to your painting. Maybe you want to change the entire color of your painting to create a completely different mood, or maybe you want to create separate moods, or maybe you want to create separate images at different times of day. So I'm going to put here time of day. To offer some options to your client. And post-production, I find it very important because I find my pieces just lack that little bit of oomph right before the end, and it's that post-production that just takes it to the absolute finished stage. And this can also mean just when your image is done, and maybe it's before the end of the day, you put in like that extra hour of just tightening everything up, or creating a really beautiful presentation around your image. Maybe you've got a character here, and you want to outline the top part of them, so you put like a little white block behind, or like just making your image look really pleasing and really professional, so that you get, of course, you make your client very happy, and you get some repeat work, right? This kind of stuff isn't talked about too much, but it's really important that you present your work professionally and you offer a lot for the money they pay you. And then you'll get more work and you'll get referred and you'll be famous, I hope. So I really hope that helps you guys. I know it's a little bit messy, but this is my process, and I do feel that over the years it has helped me to think in these terms. And I really hope that moving forward, you guys get lots of time to research and put your story ideas and narratives into your work, because number 2 and 3 to me is like the golden zone, right? It's where you separate yourself from not just the competition, but from what has been seen before and what makes magic. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you found this very dry tutorial very useful.